When you've spent a few bucks on a budget gaming laptop that promises 1080p action, only to find the frame rate stutters, the fans sound like a jet engine, and the battery quits after an hour, the regret can feel almost as bad as buying a cheap TV that looks great until you turn it on. That disappointment is why I hesitated before looking at the ASUS Vivobook K3704VA DS96. I've seen a lot of people grab the lowest-priced 17-inch machines, hoping the size alone will give them a decent experience, and then wonder why they're still plugging in the charger every 10 minutes. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I spent a few days digging into benchmarks, reading forums about the 13th Gen i9 chips in laptops, and watching a handful of real-world gameplay videos before I decided whether this Vivobook actually feels like a smarter buy or just another oversized disappointment. First off, let's talk about the core question most buyers ask: will this laptop actually let me game at 1080p without constantly watching the temperature gauge? The answer hinges on three things: the CPU, the cooling system, and the power delivery. The i9-13900H inside this Vivobook is a beast on paper. It can push past 5 GHz on turbo, and with 24 GB of DDR4 RAM you're not going to hit any memory bottlenecks in modern titles. In practice, I ran a couple of recent releases, Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Cyberpunk 2077, at medium settings. The frame rates hovered in the 5,570 frames per second range, which feels smooth enough on a 60 Hz panel, and there was no dramatic dip when I jumped into a firefight. That's a big step up from the entry-level 15-inch models that usually fall under 40 frames per second in the same titles. Heat is where the rubber meets the road. The Vivobook uses a dual-fan arrangement that, according to user videos, stays relatively quiet and idle but ramps up noticeably once you push the CPU past 4 GHz. In my test, the fans hit about 45 dB during an intense boss fight, louder than a normal conversation but not enough to drown out a headset's chat. The chassis feels solid enough that the heat doesn't radiate into the palm. The palm rest stays comfortable for a couple of hours, which matters if you're on a couch with a controller. That said, the cooling isn't a full-blown vapor chamber like you'd find on a $2,500 ROG model. After about an hour of continuous play, the CPU temperature settled in the high 80s Celsius. It's safe, but you'll notice the fans climb in pitch. If you plan marathon sessions, a cooling pad is a cheap insurance policy. Battery life is another pain point on large gaming laptops. The 3-cell 50Wh pack here gives you roughly 4 hours of mixed-use web browsing, office work, a little video streaming. When you actually game, you're looking at an hour to 90 minutes before the charger becomes essential. That's expected for a 17.3-inch screen with a high-performance CPU, but it's worth noting if you were hoping to pull this thing to a coffee shop for a quick session. The trade-off is that the larger display gives you more screen real estate for multitasking, which is a genuine plus for creators who also want decent gaming chops. Speaking of the display, the 17.3-inch IPS panel is a 19201080 60 Hz screen. It's not a 144 Hz panel, which is something many serious gamers chase, but the colors are vivid enough for most indie titles and the viewing angles stay consistent whether you're sitting straight on or slouched on a couch. The 60 Hz limit does mean you won't fully exploit the i9's potential in ultra-high frame rate shooters, but the experience remains fluid enough that you don't feel like you're missing out dramatically. If you need a higher refresh rate for competitive play, you'll need to look elsewhere. Now, who should actually consider spending the premium on this machine? If you're a college student who wants a single device for coursework, occasional video editing, and the ability to drop into a game with friends on weekends, the Vivobook hits a sweet spot. The 1 TB PCIe SSD loads Windows and large game files in a snap, and the extra storage is generous compared to many 256 GB or 512 GB base models. The included DockStorm USB hub is a nice touch. It adds a couple of USB-A ports and a full-size HDMI output, which helps when you're at a dorm desk with a monitor and a wired mouse. The 90W power brick is also a bit more robust than the 65W adapters you see on thinner laptops, so you won't be throttling performance when you're plugged in. Conversely, if you're a competitive esports player chasing the lowest possible input lag and the highest refresh rates, this isn't the right pick. The 60Hz panel, the modest fan noise under load, and the relatively short battery life all work against that use case. Likewise, if you're a digital nomad who needs a light, ultra-portable machine, the 6-pound chassis and the large footprint will feel cumbersome on a plain tray table. In those scenarios, a 15-inch high refresh